Hello, everyone. It's a little past 12, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the fourth installment of Conversations with We. My name is Chicago Amendola. I'm a member of the We Next Gen board and the marketing director for sports nutrition at Nature's Bounty. The We community is comprised of women leaders from the consumer packaged goods industry that includes suppliers, retailers, and their supported ecosystem. We create an environment that promotes networking, mentoring, and fostering relationships with the goal to expand women's voices and roles in the industry. We are excited to kick off our fourth panel discussion. Over the last few months, we talked to senior executives across the CPG and retail industries and understand the issues, necessities, and opportunities of developing and supporting diversity and inclusion. Today, we have a panel of next generation leaders we call Next Gen to hear views of their diversity and inclusion experiences from a next gen perspective and discuss opportunities from our industry to shift towards a more inclusive future for all. But before we start, I thought it'd be helpful to ground the conversation with a few key facts. The next generation is more diverse. Among millennials and Gen Z, 55% of non-Hispanic whites and 45% are diverse, compared to the boomer generation being 72% non-Hispanic whites and 28% diverse. That's a significant shift. Younger generations see social inequalities at odds with their values. 62% of millennials see diversity as an extremely very important personal value compared to 41% with boomers. And 70% of millennials agree that white people in America have privileges that other races do not have, compared to 50% of boomers. And lastly, 61% of millennials want their favorite brand to support racial, ethnic justice and equality versus, again, 51% of boomers. Diversity and inclusion is becoming an ever more important issue, especially amongst our next generation. So it's the perfect time to start this discussion to hear what our next generation leaders have to say. We also want to hear from you too. If you have any questions during this webinar, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can in the final 10 to 15 minutes of this panel. Also, know that this panel is recorded. So if any of your team members weren't able to join today, don't worry. You can share, we will share the link to this webinar in our website, forwe.org. That's the number 4, WE.org, so that you can share this webinar with your team later on if you can't participate today. So without further ado, I'm very honored to introduce Wendy Liebman. She is the CEO of WSL Strategic Retail, a global consultancy that helps clients anticipate and activate change through innovative shopper-led retail strategy. WSL is a trusted source that has many companies look at their business through a different lens. Their insights help anticipate in the changing competitive environment where shoppers are headed and opportunities that arise. Wendy has been recognized by the National Retail Federation as one of the influencers shaping the retail's future. And she's also a board member of our We, supporting the development of women in the healthcare industries. Thank you, Wendy, and I'll hand it off to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chicago. That was both a powerful introduction to what We has done over this period of time, and focus very much on what we need to be doing moving forward. So welcome, everybody. It's been both a pleasure and, I must say, an honor to be the moderator of this panel series. And you know what, it seems a very appropriate moment in time today for us to be sitting here ready to talk to the next generation of talent, although these are up-and-comers, high potential executives in our industry, because in some ways it's going to be their load with our support to push the demands, the imperative to drive diversity and inclusion. So I'm really thrilled to be here yet again. So thank you. Before I introduce our panel, I was watching something today. I was on another Zoom, you know, we're all Zoomed together these days. And somebody mentioned a quote from Ava DuVernay, the very well recognized film director who directed 13, The 13th, and When They See Us. And the quote is this, and I'm going to look at my quote here so I don't mess it up. She said, she is Black, and she says, "I don't know what diversity means, but I do know what it feels like not to be included." That's a very powerful statement, and I think it talks to us as both individuals, business executives, communities, to understand that and to recognize that, and that is what this series has done. So let me stop talking for the moment and introduce our wonderful group of panelists. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order by their first name. Our first panelist is Dwayne Houston. Hi, Dwayne. He'll come on in a second. Dwayne is the market strategy. Hey, good morning. Is the market strategy and sales director for Procter & Gamble's Vicks business in North America. He has an illustrious career there from, I think, intern up, probably not quite intern, but almost. Yes, that's right. I remembered that. And in addition to all the work he is doing internally at Procter & Gamble and his big responsibility around $1 billion plus business, he's actively involved in an organization, a not-for-profit called Inroads, which focuses on multicultural college students and developing their skills and experience. So he has both an internal and external view to what we're talking about today. Thanks for being with us, Dwayne.
Awesome, thank you, Wendy.
Yeah. Our second panelist is Sade Mohammed, and she comes from the media business. Hi, Sade. She is Forbes Director of Representation and Inclusion Partnerships in the publishing company. In fact, she has a very interesting role because she actually has created the practice of representation and inclusion at Forbes across all their media platforms with a goal to develop marketing and strategy tools to engage the broader community in programs and initiatives to improve on education and inclusion across the industries of CPG, advertising communities, and obviously publishing. So Sade, lovely to have you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And last but definitely not least is Shannon Heffernan. Shannon is, many of you may know her, she's the DMM of personal care of the Walgreens Boots Alliance. She has sort of grown up at Walgreens, has been there for many years, and some of you will know her through her experience there in skincare and cosmetics, and now heading all of the personal care parts of the organization. So Shannon, thank you for being with us as well. It's terrific. What's interesting about this group, and I think is what's so important, is not only is this a group of high potential next generation, not emerging talent, they've already emerged. But I think what's so important about this group is that they represent different industries, from CPG on the one side to retail on the other to media on the other. And I think that helps us see the commonalities of some of the issues and learn cross platforms to understand where some of the barriers and the opportunities lie. So I think this is a really, really powerful view. So again, welcome to you all. Enough of me chatting. So let's begin at the beginning. Sade, I'm going to toss the softball to you, the first one, and then please, we'll just talk. We'll be back and forth discussing. But you know, when I say diversity and inclusion, what's the imperative there for you? I mean, you had to create a new business at Forbes. What was that imperative, personally and professionally?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, the Ava DuVernay quote that you read, I think was spot on when she said she doesn't know what diversity is, but she knows what it feels like to not be included. Yes. So I would say, you know, broadly, D&I is the space to be who you are and the confidence to accept others as they are, which I think is the piece that we want to get towards. You know, on a professional realm, I think it's really empowering people towards innovation. You know, when we get rid of the barriers that are in the way, both, you know, systemically and just not being able to accept or share our authentic selves, we can really get to the business of what's the best way to bring this forward in whatever it is, whether it's a product or service or an idea. We need D&I, and I in our practice we call it representation and inclusion, because we really wanted to say we want to make sure that interests are represented, not just identities. So what does that mean to be seen as my whole self, and to see myself represented in what comes through, what I buy, what I wear, all of that. So I think, again, you know, from a personal standpoint, it's just the space to be who you are, and to say to Dwayne and Wendy and Shannon, you can be who you are too.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we start there, then we can, you know, move forward.
Yeah, words matter, right? Representation, right? Dwayne, Shannon, jump into that. What does it mean to you? What's the imperative here?
Yeah, diversity and inclusion for me, equality and inclusion as a whole, really the foundation of it for me is courage, right? Personally and professionally. Anais Nin had this great quote, the great essayist. She said that life shrinks and expands in proportion to one's courage. And I believe that our businesses will shrink and expand in our proportion to have courage behind this issue of equality and inclusion. And the reason why I say courage is because equality and inclusion, diversity and inclusion is a heart issue, right? The normal posture of our heart is just flat on the ground. And each day we got to incline it as human beings to really be able to bring our best selves, not only to work, but just to this world, right? So equality and inclusion isn't just a temporary strategy for success, but it's a holistic lifestyle that we got to live day in and day out, right? And so really it's about making sure that that posture is integrated into everything that we're doing so that we can maximize the value of all the people around us. And that's an important thing as we think about growing the business.
And Shannon, from your perspective, the imperative here?
So I think it's interesting. I have probably different personal experiences than the rest of the panel on this, but from a professional experience, it really is foundational, I'll use that word too, to our customer base. So at Walgreens, we have like well over 100 million customers. And I think sometimes the way that we've thought in the past is that, just you have this unintentional bias that the customer is like you. So when you're planning something, you unintentionally plan for someone that looks like a white girl. But when you take away that unintentional bias, you see that our customers are made up of people who do not look like me, who do not act like me. And so not only is it so important just for America, but really it is important for the foundation of our financial business to make sure that we are thinking much more broadly than we have in the past, and that we have systems in place to kind of continually nail into our heads that take us away from our unintentional biases.
It's interesting because in the very first one of these panels that we did, we had Kathleen Wilson-Thompson, who heads up global HR for Walgreens Boots Alliance, and she said impressively and very transparently that in a big company, often you tick all the EOC boxes. We did that, we did that, we did that, and think that's enough. Without really, you use the term, foundational and systemic, but that ability to understand it's more than a legal document, right? Yeah. So as we think about this, each of your companies have gone about or have begun this journey. P&G, Dwayne, seems to be the most overt in its internal and external courage, because I think that's a really important and powerful word here, in delivering both external and internal approaches to diversity and inclusion, or representation and inclusion. Can you talk a little bit about that who's leading the way, how that came about, what it looks like today?
Yeah, so let me break it into two. Let's talk external separately, and then we'll talk internally. Externally first, I think P&G's stance of one winning with consumers has been great, right? That's step one. And the reason why that's important, because a lot of times I think we can all agree that minorities and minority groups are usually at the front end of trends, right? So from a business direction, being able to win with them, it's a business imperative that we're in tune with those consumers in a big way, right? But also externally pushing the hard conversations that are enabling people to at least have the conversation, start dialogue, and then eventually have that lead to social change, right? Initiatives like the Talk and things like that, that P&G has put out as commercials that are controversial, but also enable people to have some dialogue. I know we've caught some flack for that as a business, but I think it's also been a very strong thing. Internally, I think David Taylor, our CEO, has done a good job of starting at this baseline, which really took a lot of courage, I think, for leaders, which is, hey, there is systemic bias in the system. There are systemic injustices in the system. And although they may be unintentional, and since they are unintentional, that's okay, but we need to be intentional about helping the people that it disproportionately affects, right? That takes a level of due diligence of, hey, we are acknowledging that this is here. Now we need to take action to actually dive in and correct it. And it's going to take accountability at a lot of levels. If I think of kind of just generally how the business has broken it out in pillars, it kind of starts at leadership accountability, right? So how are we going to hold our leaders accountable at a high level and then infiltrate that throughout the organization? Second is capability. Hey, we want the organization, broad leaders and employees alike, to be able to have a firm understanding of equality and inclusion, what bias even means, so I can even be aware of it. I think the third piece rolls into compensation, right? Hey, we need a strategic intervention in our compensation package where minorities are disproportionately affected. And then additionally, we need to make sure that we're tying compensation to diversity and inclusion goals to make sure that it's incentivized throughout our actions. The fourth piece is advancement, right? Making sure that you're strategically moving minorities throughout the organization and being intentional with their careers, making sure they're in the right place at the right time. But even more importantly, anybody that's managing somebody, ensuring that their background and their skill set qualifies them to lead a diverse organization. And then that last piece, which I think we've done a great job externally, is starting to move in a lot internally, which is creating this dialogue and feedback, right? How do we open the door for leaders and for organization to have an ongoing conversation around diversity and inclusion and enable it to be something that's not taboo, right? Or awkward or weird. And I think those are the pillars externally and internally that have been implemented to give us some progress as we try to make momentum behind the equality and inclusion.
That's interesting. You know, Sade, I think about your, not just your background in media, but this role that you have now created within the organization at Forbes. And I remember you saying to me when we first talked that, you know, you were a little surprised about it, that it's taking a while to, or it didn't move as fast as you thought. I may be misappropriating your words in that, but you know, can you just, from a media company where you are dealing with a broad base of external advertisers, marketing companies, how have you seen this now in terms of inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'd say, you know, obviously starting with the murder of George Floyd, that kind of, you know, that spurred the number of statements and all of those things that came out thereafter. So I'm keeping a close eye, an optimistic close eye on what follows those statements. And I think from a marketing perspective, we can see that in the conversations that we have with agencies and brands, and we can, you know, you can sort of gauge who's really on the path and who maybe needs a little bit more time, which is what we're here to support with. So for example, you know, we're working with an agency who we had been working with them for a couple of years, and they were always pushing for inclusion. How do we get, you know, better voices in this campaign? How do we tell different stories? And so, you know, we worked really closely with them to push those ideals forward. You know, since this summer, they've ramped that up and really figured out how to ask those same questions tactically. how to make that part of the spreadsheet, quote unquote.
Mhm.
You know, with other companies, you know, it may be this, you know, sort of boxed into the spreadsheet, to the, are we checking those boxes to what you said before? Are we compliant? As opposed to, who is my customer? What do they want to hear from me? What should I be saying? What should I be listening for? And it doesn't all have to happen at once, but we're willing to bet that moving past that compliance piece and moving into the real conversations, having the right relationships and access, focusing on content and leading with that and being in front of folks where they are is what's going to move the needle. Because there's, you know, to Chicago's research, the world just, it looks differently than it did. And so, you know, especially with Gen Z, they want to see themselves in the product, full stop. And so they need to know, you're not just trying to sell to me, you are me.
Mhm.
See me. And so that's what we're trying to build, is to create, open that space for conversation beyond the tick marks that we have to, you know, we have to reach. But how do we move beyond that and start to have real conversations and develop relationships? And we've seen our partners who have done that. It has paid off in spades.
So I see you nodding, Shannon, because, you know, I you know, within a big global retail organization, not to suggest both the other two of you are not in big global organizations, but in a big global retail organization, sometimes that's harder, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I think Shadi said it so nicely, which is like, we need to go from compliance to, and I don't know what the next word is, but we need to I don't know if the word's integrated or natural. It needs to become in our DNA. So there's ways that are easier to do and there's ways that are more difficult to do. So the important part is that you're on a journey and you have a plan to get from A to Z, and it might take some time. So it can be difficult in a large corporation, a large retailer, especially one of smaller size. So a retailer that I think does it so beautifully is Target. So they like make a stand and they say, these are our minority-owned businesses and they're female businesses and they're right in the front of the store and the clothing is really cool, and they just do such a good job. So other retailers need to do that. So it's my job with my colleagues in leadership to think of creative solutions of bringing that forward in a place where realistically our space is just much smaller. So to take a risk on any small or unknown supplier, minority or not, it's a gamble, but we have to do it. So, you know, we're not going to be able to turn the store over or turn our e-com over in a day, but we need to take very concerted, direct action to be able to make change. So, and the only way to do it is to be very direct and overt about it, which is kind of what Dwayne had been saying earlier.
Yeah. So who do you look to, question to all of you, are there people within your organizations or that external organizations that you're involved with that are, you know, your support in this? You know, you don't have to name names, but, you know, how do we think about this in terms of leadership? Who should we be looking to for support, particularly if you're pushing, you've got a lot of heavy lifting, as people say? Take a pick. Jump in. Dwayne, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, my perspective on this one is it's a top-down push, right? And in organizations where the leadership may not be strategically aligned, right? Which I don't really know a business unit that's not aligned to diversity and inclusion or equality and inclusion, at least as a principle, is to start at the next level up, right? And I think having those critical conversations with the next level up, because most of us are in roles where, hey, the next level ahead of us strategically is running and building organizations, right? So being able to work on their heart and get to the front of their brain on social issues is also very important. Because what we want people to do is not just to engage in diversity and inclusion but to indulge in it, right? There's a difference, right? I want you to be able to eat off of the culture. I want you to be able to partake in it, so that way you can directly influence. You know the good things about it, but you also know the things that are a little bit sour, so that way you can start to implement the principles in your organization in order to make it happen. So I think that's where I would recommend to start, for me personally.
Mhm. Shannon, you were nodding there. Don't nod if you don't want me to ask you a question, otherwise you'll get
Fair. It's fair. I think that for me, it's people who mentor me through it are people that are really good at removing barriers. So I think some people are just innately good at doing that. I think it's leadership, absolutely. I think a lot of really good ideas, this is not meant defensively, but don't necessarily come from leadership. They come from other team members, and so therefore it's kind of our job to make sure that that voice then comes together in a plan. And then where I've had success is I have a couple of mentors or leaders who are really good at not saying all the things that can go wrong with our ideas, but like, here's what might happen, here's how I would remove that barrier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sade, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I agree with that in terms of removing barriers, Shannon. I feel the same way. And, you know, kudos to Forbes for, when I pitched this position last October, immediately pretty much saying yes, you know, within weeks. So I think that's key, is having leadership who's willing to say, show us the way, you know, what's a different way? What's a better way?
Right.
And then removing the barriers that, you know, we may not see at our level in order to make those things happen.
I think it is, you know, for me, and, you know, obviously different generations sitting here listening to you all, you know, it feels to me like, you know, on the one hand, we've got, if there's a lead, you know, I think you said it, Dwayne, you know, the sort of both intellectually, emotionally, commercially, leadership is now saying, we got to do it. We, you know, okay, got it to whatever degree, but I got it, right? And then who pushes it? And it feels to me like, as I look at the three of you, that people within your role, you know, high potential talent already in an executive level, do have the power to have senior level management think about change, particularly if they can't quite envision what it should be or how to do it, right? Am I jumping the gun here and putting way too much pressure on all of you?
No, I think what you said is right? Which is, you're either going to learn two ways. Mm-hmm. The organization is either going to start to speak to you and you're going to listen as the organization starts to change, right? And a younger generation moves in and it starts to accelerate, or actions are going to speak louder than words, and your organization is going to look different, because you're going to have high levels of attrition, not only with minorities, but with other millennials, other Gen Zers that continue to come up through the organization, in which this is important, right? I think we're getting to the stage across our industries where compensation isn't enough. Compensation is not enough. There has to be a cognitive investment and a cognitive understanding that not only is diversity and inclusion, equality and inclusion important here, but we're going to put it as a priority, and we're going to make sure that it's induced in everything that we do, so that way it is natural. It is something that just free flows within our organization. And people that act indifferent to it are looked at as cultural outcasts within the organization, and not the people that are diverse themselves, right? Or at least have that mindset. So I think it can play out a couple of different ways. There's one that's probably a little bit more pleasant than the other, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I also think about that notion of internal, external. So, you know, a lot of people see the commercial opportunity now, you know, to, as you were saying, Sade, you know, Gen Z wants to see themselves in the marketing, in the campaigns, and the social media. If you do that externally, but you don't change the internal face of the company, of the organization thinking, is it that, you know, somebody walks into Walgreens and says, okay, you've got this message, but where's the diversity in the organization? That feels to me like it's a real clash of cultures. Is that what you three see?
Yes, for sure. I mean, and I think, you know, Dwayne said it goes beyond compensation. Totally agree. It goes beyond employee resource groups even. You know, it goes into, what am I doing day to day? What does my job and what my goals are and what success looks like in my role, does that advance equity or does that stifle it? So, in the marketing context, going back to what I was saying earlier, those spreadsheets can be really limiting, so it's not just that, but is the work that I'm doing actually helping me to say, hey, I can see this happening a different way. And just having that openness to that conversation, creating that space sometimes creates the change, because someone says, I have all these ideas, I'm ready to share them. I just need to know that there's space to do that. So I think that's a part of it too, is looking at your role and your team and how are ideas exchanged, how are decisions made? Is that inclusive? Or is it, this is the way we have to do it? So that's pretty much it, which I think we all can agree isn't going to work in the long term.
And that's not a color specific, I'm being blunt,
No.
role, right? It means that everyone, Shannon and I here, you two, and everyone within our organizations has to think about that. It just feels there's such a commercial, just forget all the really important things like social issues, right? Political issues. But it's such an important commercial issue, right? Why would I shop somewhere that doesn't respect me and doesn't represent me within an organization? Am I being naive here? Am I being foolish?
I think you hit it right on the head.
Yeah.
You're right on that.
Yeah. Are you seeing that for you, Dwayne and Shannon, where you're dealing with the consumer, the shopper, the patient on a day-to-day basis? Are you feeling that in either your research or what you're seeing on the selling floor? I mean, are you seeing that reaction from, the people you sell goods and services to?
Yeah, I'll take it from a brand perspective, especially kind of working on a cold and flu business that's really wrapped up in heritage and things of that nature, and even just across P&G with brands, is where we have these big national brands that we think automatically, because they're generational, have equity with the next generation, right? And the reality is that's false. And that as we move over into the next generation, while some things may be staples, consumers aren't as loyal if you don't appeal to them, right? And so we have to be intentional with how we continue to take some of the heritage from the brand that they might have experienced in their childhood, make it relevant today, and then allow, to what Sade said earlier, allow for the consumer to not only see themselves using the product, but cognitively at least be able to experience it in an emotional way before they even purchase, right? That takes effort, that takes funding, we got to spend in order to do that. And I think we need to be really intentional as an industry to make sure that we do that so we don't miss out or marginalize a category unintentionally.
Yeah. And Shannon, when I think about the categories that you're responsible, some of those in particular under your broad responsibility feel like categories that help you get started in this conversation, right? That Walgreens was early to the piece on in some of them, in categories like hair care and skin care, some of the other personal care categories. How are you working with your suppliers, your vendors, in some of these initiatives? Can you talk about that kind of partnership?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I obviously have a lot of supplier partners that I work with. P&G is the biggest. But so of all the supplier partners that we have, I would say that almost every single one kind of attacks, I'll call it this issue. It's not the right term, but attacks this issue in a different way. So some brands go to the place where they spend a lot of money to market in a certain way or to fund a nonprofit in a certain way. And some brands fundamentally change the way that they're launching a brand or an item, which takes time, of course. And so my job is to kind of see, obviously use a lot of customer analytics and then see what's coming from each of them and try to develop a story around, okay, it feels like the first low-hanging fruit here is it's for me to get my assortment right, meaning the adjacencies, something that simple, the adjacencies from our textured hair planograms to our general hair market planograms, over the years have just gotten wonky. And of course, you know, first of all, I don't see every planogram. There's like a billion of them. And, you know, secondly, I think we buy other, so like there's the Duane Reade integration and there's other integrations, and unintentionally, to Duane's point, things happen where details not, things are uncovered where you're like, oh, that is not an appropriate message to be sending. I didn't know that that existed in store. So I think step one is for me to get our own house in order, to say like, work with, get other opinions, diverse opinions. If I don't feel like I have enough within my team, that I seek out other diverse opinions to say like, where have we fallen here and how do I get my own house in order? And then I think I work with the suppliers, and it's difficult and it's a long-term thing. And there's, it necessitates a lot of simplifying complex problems, but that's our job, right? So then it's, what are the brands doing and how are they speaking? Is there unification there? Should I fight for more unification, or are each of them bringing something different that is additive? And then I need to map out how we can execute that well over the course of several years. So it's complicated, and I think that's a lot of the reason why people haven't knocked it out of the park yet. It's not easy, but it's just couldn't be more important, and that's shown in our sales results in the past. Since it was before George Floyd, but since George Floyd, absolutely, customers are speaking to us with their money. So not to your point, Wendy, not only is it the right thing socially and politically to do, but foundationally and commercially, we're there.
Yeah. Yeah, and clearly this is not a simple issue. The question is, how do you begin, and then how do you keep it moving, and then through big and small organizations, how do you ensure that there is an understanding from top down and middle bottom up to engage here and act, not just talk about it. So are there, as I think about this, as I'm sort of riffing in my own brain here, are there one or two things that your generation, one of the things I ask myself is, if you're not on board as the representatives of this next generation, one, are you going to stick around? I'm not asking if you're leaving your companies. I'm not asking you to go on that tightrope. But is there something about the values you expect from the companies you work for that say, if they don't represent what's important to me, I don't stick around anymore, because we're very different from, Gen Xers or boomers or anything else? Oh, who's going to dive in on that one? Come on,
I'll dive in.
Oh, Shade. Go on, Shade. Dive in.
I think it's a really good question. I think the most important thing is probably a feedback loop, a true feedback loop, because when you think about just how things happen in the social media world, a group gets riled up, topic, right? And they want change and they want answers, and there's a definite goal most times, or sometimes, with that sort of rile up. So I think and a lot of times rightfully so in our corporate spaces, we're not getting riled up, we're just asking for equity, right? And so I think the feedback loop is what's most important, is that if I raise my hand and say, this is a problem, this needs to be changed, and there's someone on the other end of that, senior leadership most likely, that's there to say, you're right, here are some ideas I have, what do you think, how should we go about this? I will do what I can to make sure that we can get to the outcome that we want. So I think engagement from senior leadership is key. They, have to know that we can talk to you, that you want to learn. You don't have to have all the answers. I think that's part of what makes us feel good too, right? Like, oh, we have some answers, we have a pathway forward. So that's fine. But I think the feedback loop is critical. And I say loop because it's not just action, reaction, but continual and, iterating on that.
Yeah. So entrenched in it's not a one-off. It's not, oh, gee, this happened. So it's not just a reaction. you know, to a
Exactly.
moment in time, however painful the moment in time is. Yeah.
Wendy, to kind of touch on your question, my one word response would be congruency, or, you know, the ability to be congruent. Because I think all internal organizations have great, strong values, right? There, I don't know a big national corporation where you'll look at their PVPs and you'll say, "Oh, you guys sound like a bad company. I'm not going to work there." Right on the surface, everybody has something that's written out, and you're like, "Okay, I can stand behind that as a human being. It might not be everything on my list, but it's enough, and I can get behind that." What that needs to be congruent to for people like myself and for my peers in order to have a sustainable long-term career is that needs to be congruent with the culture. Your culture has to be congruent with your values need to be congruent with your culture. And your culture needs to be cultivated in a way in which people can bring not them full selves to work, right? But their most effective self to work. There's this myth out here, and I think especially amongst, you know, minorities and kind of equality and inclusion, I hear it a lot within the organization. People say, "Hey, we want people to bring their full selves to work. Dwayne, we want you to bring your full self to work." I'm like, "You don't want me to bring my full self to work." Okay, and I probably don't want you to bring your full self to work.
You see enough in Zoom, right? This is
exactly. What you want for me is to be able to bring my most effective self to work. And how we do that as organizations, and how I've seen it done well, is where the organization has values, but then establishes effective principles, right? And then tools to make those effective principles work, right? And those effective principles have no styles attached to them, right? And so if I operate the principle, I can be effective in the organization, whether I speak with a little twang in my voice, whether I'm from the deep South, whether I'm from Europe, whether I'm from the islands, it doesn't matter. And I can be included within the organization. Where there's a gap, and I think a gap for minorities is where we start to see high attrition rates specifically, is where not only do I have to activate the principle, but I have to activate the style, which takes me out of my authentic self. And now I'm full blown acting every day, because the culture isn't congruent with the values, right? So that's kind of what I mean by that. That's a long-winded way of saying congruency.
Yeah, I also think that as I look in all our work, where we're doing continuous work with shoppers, consumers as shoppers, you know, one of the things that's really clear to me, and I can't remember who alluded to it before, that the next generation, if we look at Gen Z, whatever color they are, you know, wherever they come from, have a very different view to organizations and brands that aren't representative. So I sort of feel like we're getting to a point here where there are going to be other people at the barricades, which we've already seen, right, through the last, since George Floyd was murdered. We've seen, you know, a diversity at the barricades of younger people saying, "I'm this color and I'm white and I don't come from here, or I don't come from there, and I expect the companies, the organizations, the political powers, the whatever that be, to stand up to certain values," you know? And so I think about you as leaders in this journey, but I think there are people nibbling at your knees, your ankles and your knees, saying, "No, that's not going to be good enough either." So it's, anyway, that's just, you know, an observation from the chief shopper role that I play a lot. So just last piece, because I think we are getting close to some questions. If you're talking to your colleagues, either in your companies or externally, you know, people of your not only generation, but your level within organizations, what's the message that you want to deliver to them that they need to, that helps them respond and see that they have power to change here, or change organizations here?
That's a good
one. Shannon, be careful. I'm going to ask you first.
That's fine. So I think I was thinking, when you said that, I was thinking my colleagues, and I was thinking the team that I support, and then I was thinking my leadership. And I think the message is kind of what's been said, which is people, it is all of our responsibilities. It's not like, you know, even something employee engagement, you know, like you get a score, and we tend to think, that's for like leadership to deal with, or that's for so-and-so to deal with. It is ours. And so everyone is responsible for taking action. And I hope that that would empower the team kind of more on the front lines, for lack of a better term, to have ideas and not to think that it's like a stupid suggestion and assume that somebody already thought of it, because I think that's how a lot of things get missed. And then I think it's, at our level to formulate a really robust plan, and then it's for our senior leadership to, like I said, endorse it and to remove barriers. That's how I kind of see the channels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wendy, my feedback to the org would be to evolve strategically, right? We have at times this idea that equality and inclusion is this mountaintop, right? And then once we achieve it, all the work is done. And it's never been like that, right? Even in our organizations, they take equality and inclusion out, right? Success has always been a movement. It has never been a moment, right? You hit one thing, you got to continue the anniversary or whatever the case may be. So within equality and inclusion, as the times change, right, so will some of our practices. And as we start to achieve success around some of these issues, right, there's going to be other issues that pop up later down the road. As long as there's evil in this world, there's going to be hate, there's going to be bias, and there's going to be, so we need to continue to evolve to make sure that our organizations don't get left behind, right, or disadvantaged because we can't keep up with the ongoing trend of being able to create an inclusive environment for the people that work for us and for the people in which we serve. We have a social responsibility as an organization to steward our internal organizations, to steward our brands, and to steward our consumers in a way that delights them. So evolve strategically is what I would say.
Yeah, and Sade, since I began with you, I'm going to toss the last one at you. And then I know there are some questions that have popped up, so I want to hand back over to Chicago so she can field those. But, what are we missing in this? What am I, talk to me. What am I missing in all this? Me, the face of, the white executives in this industry, whatever that industry is what am I missing? What's the obvious thing that I'm missing, or that maybe it's not, sorry. What am I missing?
Yes, I would say that, we have to recognize, and I think the world has woken up to the fact that there are and were systemic barriers put in place for these kinds of conversations to seem awkward, very nuanced, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not starting from just, is there a problem? That's not the starting place. Is it was put in place so that we don't have these conversations. So I think the first step is realizing that there's work that has to be undone before we can start the new work. And figuring out what needs to be undone is critically important. From the Forbes, perspective, we're doing work to make sure that internally the freelancers that we work with on the branded content side, be it, writers, graphic designers, et cetera, who are they and what do they represent? And, because those are the people who have the voices and are the voice of Forbes. So what does it look like to change and evolve that makeup? And again, there's, systemic things put in place to exclude, yes, but on the unintentional side, to just go with the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
And the path of least resistance, has often been do it the way we've always done it.
So the urgency here, and that's why we titled this series, We Move Forward, because it sounds like for many of the things you've all said, it is about getting on with it, but it is also about learning, deconstructing old ways and building at all aspects of organizations to do that. Well, I have great faith that now that you three are at the ropes, at the barricades on all of this, in all your different organizations, you are a great guide to this. And I can't thank you enough. This has been a powerful conversation. And I think the openness of the conversation is the thing that's so important, asking questions and being willing to listen, even if it's uncomfortable. So thank you all, the three of you. What I'm going to do is hand this back over now to Chicago, who's going to field some of these questions that we've got in the last 10 minutes. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Be well, Chicago. Back to you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you to Wendy and all the panelists. Wendy said it right. What a powerful conversation we just had. And so we do have a couple of questions. The first one, I think maybe if Dwayne, you can kind of take the lead, but then I think also might be interesting to hear from a media perspective, Sade, your perspective as well. The question is, as a brand, how do you make a bold statement supporting diversity and inclusion? Do you have any suggestions and approach?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to a statement that I said earlier, which is being able to indulge in the culture, right, and really understand what the real issues are in society, or at least within the culture in which you're trying to influence. And once you have a real grasp or a real understanding on the issue, then you have a choice as a brand to either utilize it to just sell or to utilize it to have some social impact, right? And that's how you really both are effective, in my opinion, right? You see P&G do it all the time, right? Like Old Spice is one of those that will kind of just go after the sale, right? And then you think about FemCare on the other hand, and, you know, jumping right into the crux of, hey, I'm not just a girl, right? Like there's more to that. So I think those are the two options, and that's what I would recommend.
Sade, do you have any thoughts from kind of a media perspective?
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, it's really key to be true to Dwayne's point, to your brand. The way that everyone's doing it does not have to be the way that you do it. And I think, you know, that's a function of marketing where, like, if that works, then it's going to work for everybody. But it's really to say, who are we? Like, you know, and what's bold for your brand to another brand that might be like, that was so last year. That's okay. But I think when you go from 0 to 100, if that's not your brand identity at the moment, it feels off base to people. So I would say just to be true to who you are and where you are in the moment.
Great, thank you. The next question is around the retailer. So Shannon, I'll have you answer. So you mentioned, you know, the retailers are also trying to be, you know, stand up for diversity and inclusion. So how can a brand or manufacturers, what can they do to support a retailer that's trying to take those stands?
I really like that question. That's a really thoughtful question. So I would love it, and this is like kind of outrageous, but I would love it if brands would help, and I think like the Emerson Group does this already, but even, you know, I would think that like suppliers like P&G, I would love it if those, if we set something up, if it doesn't exist already, to help consult small minority businesses into how to be successful at a major retailer. So there's some just really, there's some nuances that are difficult and probably create a lot of unintentional roadblocks from, you know, the way that our payment terms are set up to our expectations of, you know, an exit strategy, really tactical things that probably get in the way of us really seeing breakthrough brands. So of course, it's the responsibility of the retailer to kind of offer some free consult to say, like, here's what I'm looking for, here's what I'm not looking for. But the best people at building brands are the people that have already built brands, in my opinion. So I would say that, like, what better way to start than with somebody from, you know, P&G to help take that. And obviously, I'm just saying P&G because, you know, Dwayne's face is right in front of mine. But really, all retailers, it is. I think that was something that is probably uncomfortable. But I think that there's a barrier there that breaking through that barrier would help a lot of brands succeed.
Thank you. This question, Dwayne, is actually directed to you. So Dwayne, what would you say to an even younger generation just entering the workforce or still in college about why CPG could be the right move for them, industry to consider?
Wow, that is a very thoughtful question. I'm a sales guy by trade, so I'll throw on the hat. I think the interesting part about CPG is that you can be anybody that you want to be, and you can do anything that you want to do. I think it's very few industries where you can come in, and if you want to move to the tech side, you can be in tech. Hey, if you want to move to e-commerce, you can be in e-commerce. If you have a passion in a certain lane, whether it's health or whether it's skincare, whatever the place may be, or whether even it's food, right? You can jump into anything. And I think the thing that I love the most about the industry is seeing how a lot of the big corporations are taking a big stance on diversity and inclusion. And I think the ability for us as organizations to put out that, hey, these roles are big. These roles can be what you want them to be. A career here or anywhere in the industry can be what you want it to be, and allow for our young talent to engage, at least in the strategy and the vision, will allow for our compensation systems as an industry to latch on a little bit harder. Because your compensation probably hits a little different at year 5 than it did at year 1, right? And because you were engaged in the strategy, engaged in your career, now you're looped in, and we have top talent retained within the industry for longer periods of time versus losing it to tech, et cetera, et cetera. So my sales pitch would be, you can be anybody you want to be here. And there's definitely organizations that can offer you the career of your dreams if you choose to have it.
That was wonderful. I wish I had talked to you when I was in college. So with that, I know we're running close to time. Thank you so much to all the panelists, Dwayne, Shannon, Sade, for your time and great insight. You know, this was so important to have this conversation. You know, it's so great to hear from viewpoints, you know, of our next generation leaders. You know, let's continue to have this conversation and push the boundaries and create a better, more inclusive, kinder world. As I mentioned before, we will be uploading this video on 4we.org. So that's the number 4, we.org. Please share this with your teams and colleagues. Thank you to Adventist Healthcare for all of their support and these panels. Again, thank you to Wayne, Shannon, Sade, and of course, Wendy. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thanks.